Hi, I'm Miguel. I am a developer. I work at a startup called Wallcoin, and then in my free time, I build my ideas. I guess I just try to build every idea that comes to my mind and have some fun while doing it.
Can you just give a quick sentence on what you've done and what have you experienced?
Yeah, so I built maybe 200, 300 things. The main ones are just like a lot of crypto tools, a lot of like tools to get it easier to do things with crypto, to make it easier to learn Solidity. I do a lot of building in the open and learning in the open. And so when I was getting into crypto, I did a lot of like very public ways that I was learning. The example projects that I created, the things that I made there, all very publicly, and then also made a bunch of SaaS projects just a few years ago when I was in high school. Yeah, general ideas is like stuff that I think is cool and that I am not happy with what everyone else has built it.
Yeah.
No one else has tried before. I just try and do that in a few weeks or in a month.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, build what you want, of course. I think is a great position to have. And then, so what's your story growing up? Where you're from? What's your background in general?
Yeah, so I'm from Spain, which is not a very entrepreneurial country. And for like the story was always just like you go to school, you go to high school, you go to college, and then you just get a job somehow.
Yeah,
And sure, but I even like in high school in my free time, I was always just probably spending more time actually doing the whole coding thing than the actual homework and just like making my own little apps while everyone else was like playing piano or doing
yeah,
football or whatever. And so as I kept doing more and more of that, and I did go to college, unfortunately in COVID year, so that didn't go very well. But I was still like, even in class, it's like coding a little bit, doing these things. And at some point I was just like, I should really try to like, I don't know, stop holding myself back and figure out how it would be if I actually like the only thing that I did. And I was never like part of the whole SF racing startups thing. It was mostly like I feel like Europe has a more bootstrap culture. We're trying to like make something small and maybe you grow it a little bit without taking any investment and you just make something that's like sustainable and like good enough to pay your bills and that's it. So that's what I did for a while. I did a lot of projects that were just like had no expenses, were profitable from day one, maybe even weren't paid. I just made for fun.
that's cool though. Yeah,
Yeah,
building in class. Tell me more about your school experience. I think a lot of people we're going to reach are going to be in the younger generations and who are still in school or still in college or just out of college. What was your experience in school like in terms of what you spent your time on?
yeah, so in school, luckily, I was like the kind of kid that just went to a library on recess and just wrote some code in the computers there. And
Yeah,
then luckily, like I have no idea what grade it was because like US system, but we got computers. At first, Android tablets and then computers with mostly unrestricted access to the internet. And so after that, I was just like either reading or like coding via the GitHub UI, even before there was like the web VS Code thing. Just like doing things. I guess with Replit these days would be the way to do it
yeah.
all the time. Like even when I should be doing something else.
How do you get started into that? Do you remember what the first project you did was, or what really launched your love into building
Yeah, I
things?
remember I always was like this kind of kid that is just like pressing all the buttons, figuring out what it does. You open a folder in Windows XP that some files appear that are like semi-transparent. You delete those. You delete everything. You see what happens when you press buttons. And
Yeah,
so I knew what coding was. I tried to learn it, but the way that I tried to learn it is I found some books about C. I downloaded it on my ebook, and I was like 8, 9 at this point. Like it didn't go great. It wasn't achievable. And
yeah,
then I think when I was 10 or so, I discovered this thing called HTML. It was like, sure, may not be a programming language depending on who you ask, but it was much more achievable. You could just write something like would show in the page even if you wrote it wrong. And
yeah.
so I went from there. I started just clicking, view source, copying things, changing them a little bit, seeing what happened, learn a little bit of PHP, and then started doing that more. What happens if I do this? I'm going to copy the example from the documentation for database interaction, just replicate this 1,000 times. And I started doing a lot of open source because my reasoning there was just like, I am not very good at coding currently. So the best thing that I can do is put this thing in the open, make something that people want to use, and then people will kind of be forced to fix my mistakes.
Yeah,
That was like the reasoning, and so that got me starting to just. I started using this framework called Laravel. I started reading all the PRs that came up to the library, trying to understand what they did, being a little bit annoying, and like commenting, "I don't understand why you did this way when you did not." And like, first of all, that got the attention of people that did want to help me, even top maintainers and creators of this framework, and then
yeah.
also that just helped a lot in me seeing everyday code coming in, understanding all of the internals of this thing. That yeah, so I
That
I kind of like started that way, just like. reading a lot of open source code and asking a lot of questions.
Generally, we want to give people applicable things they could do right now. If you're going to restart, imagine you're back in that time, but today in 2022, like what would be the best path to do this? You just mentioned Replit as a good place to start, but it sounded like what you're saying, which is you started super simple and then kept messing around in a simple area and then kept getting progressively more complicated. And so, like, where do you recommend people start right now?
Yeah, my philosophy for learning, even now, and I've said this way a lot of times, it's just like learning by debugging. So you throw yourself into a problem, and then developers are really good at debugging. You just get better at it over time. It's probably like I feel like for younger people, it's a really easy skill to find how to Google things.
Yeah.
So that's the way you learn. At the very, very start, it doesn't work as well. But once you have something, like one thing that you understand, just like try to get into a project, try to get into a situation where there's mostly that thing, but there's a bit that is new. So for example, when I was learning all of this crypto stuff at the start, I didn't throw myself into smart contracts, I didn't throw myself into Uniswap, all of these things. What I did was I made a front application, which I was like pretty comfortable with, Next.js, Tailwind CSS, all of these things that I was using every day. And then
Yeah.
yes, this was like the smallest thing that I can like add to this. And there was this publishing platform called Mirror that was using a decentralized storage called Arweave, and that thing had a GraphQL API. And I'm like, okay, I'm not familiar with this decentralized storage thing, but I've used GraphQL before. So this has like mostly things that I'm familiar with, but then a small little thing that is new. And
Yeah.
doing that, I learned a little bit of how Arweave works, and that helped me then understand more on crypto. So that's even from the start, that's the way that you learn it.
To be clear, I wrote that down in my notes back when you said it in that interview. I've told so many people learn by debugging before. So yeah, it's definitely it's a great insight. I think I give a lot of people that advice. So yeah, can you just give us the general story of like your entire builder journey and how you got to where you are now?
So like I said, I got started at and then it took me like 2, 3 years to actually learn how to make something like end product where I was just like doing learning PHP. I learned at first just like using Bootstrap. So learning CSS, learning a little bit of how design works, learning front end, like all of these things really slowly. And then I made a full app. It took a year to make an app that like, generated docs from your GitHub things. I decided maybe people would pay for it. I learned that like making an app and making something that people want are two completely different things. So I
Yeah.
did a bit more of that. I made a bunch of projects. I made one that people actually liked, and I started getting better at marketing and all the things. So this was like the indie maker journey, where I was like, there was all these communities, Whip.chat, MakerLog, all of these are dead now. GenZ Mafia as well. I was just like, I am an indie maker. I am seeing all of these people are just like making apps, just like doing that in public, making these little apps, having fun. Then I went to college for a few months. I lasted 3 months in there. And doing that at first, especially the end of it, I was just like actually saying, "Okay, I want some money." Like some people really, I had been turning offers from everyone to, "Do you want to do some developer work for us?" No, and then I
Yeah.
decided let's go with a few of that. And so I did a bunch of like contract work, building a bunch of apps. And then after I quit college, I guess I happened to be like the whole NFT boom or a little before that. And so, thanks to a few friends, I got into crypto. I got into crypto with a small community of people that already were in there for a few times. And so, I just was really annoying for a few months, asked them a lot of questions, made all of these little projects, and got decided if I'm not going to go to college, might as well just get a job so that I have a schedule and not just fucking around. And so,
Yeah.
I got a job at this crypto startup, Showtime. And I did that for a year, doing front end engineering there, actually their first employee. And that helped me learn a lot about how crypto works, really. Like
Yeah.
implementing an NFT marketplace from scratch. I started learning smart contracts, even though I wasn't doing that there. All of those things. And then there was a time where I felt like I had hit the ceiling of what I could learn there. And so I took 2 months to just do a bunch of my own things that require more time that I had at Showtime. And then after that, I joined Walcoin with as a smart contract engineer, though I ended up doing a little bit of everything. And yes, I mean, through all of this, I've also been doing little projects, and now I'm like actually taking the time to work on some bigger ones.
That's definitely such an interesting journey. Also, you worked on a bunch of, I think, like you're definitely underrating the scale and impact of a lot of your
Yeah,
projects.
there was like the Constitution stuff. There's a bunch of
Yeah.
stuff that I haven't even released that I think is really cool.
Yeah. No, totally. And also, like, you're also probably one of the most prolific builders I know in terms of release. I don't think there's many other people who rival you in terms of release schedule in our generation right now. So, when you have these stages, and you talked about going from messing around and then the stage when you start kind of learning by debugging, and then
Yeah.
you talked more about getting into the marketing and building a product people want, which is its own kind of battle, and then going back to the projects and now kind of to the joining a whole organization and working in an environment. Can you kind of delineate more of these kind of jumps? What are the things that were hard to kind of transition to?
I would say the only thing that actually felt like a jump was like going from not having a job to actually working with a team. So I
Mm,
hadn't really had worked with friends before, but it's not the same thing. And then after going from like a small startup where I was the first employee to Wallqueen, which is like a company with more than 100 people, the
yeah,
only jumps were just like from just like doing everything by myself for years to actually working for a team, having a designer, which is insanely cool. The fact that if something breaks, maybe it's not your fault.
yeah.
Or like you don't have to come up with everything. That was really cool. And I am still not awesome at just like actually day to day working with a team. I have a lot to learn in that regard.
I don't know. I think, and one thing it's about being and like getting ready for these transitions. I think a lot of people haven't made these transitions from starting out and learning how to code to progressing forward. I know a lot of people struggle to make the jump from I do a coding class or take CS50 or do a starter project and then moving further into the kind of debugging and building more projects. People, I know how to do for loops. What do I do next? Do you have any advice for people trying to get forward and kind of break that inflection point?
Yeah, I feel like the reason why I don't like courses like bootcamps or CS50, and I have never done CS50, but like my girlfriend went through it recently.
Yeah,
But I feel like it teaches you how to implement logic, but they don't do an awesome logic explaining how you come with it. Like the experience that have talking to some of these people is they understand how a for loop is, they understand how do you use it, but when you say them, I want you to build this thing, they are blocked because
mm,
they have no idea how you would even start doing that. Like they know that if they need a for loop, they know how to use a for loop. They don't know when they need them. And
right.
just like in general, how to do this. And I feel like that's where it's debugging. I feel like it's the skill that allows you to do that. And debugging, I guess it's more of a specific thing. I use it really generally because I feel like debugging is just like you have a problem, you get yourself out of it in a way. But I feel like the thing where I'm just like, oh, I want to make a tweet where the replies automatically get turned into images with stable diffusion. That was a thing that I did recently.
Yeah,
How would you start doing that? There's a couple of ways that you would do that, but you just poll every few minutes you call and you get the latest replies. For those replies, you run stable diffusion on them somehow. Maybe there's an API, you call that API, you get the results. Then you have to post a tweet. How do you do that? You have to upload the media to Twitter. Then you have to post the link. Maybe there's some rate limits that you have to work towards. That
right.
process from this is what I have to do. To, these are like actual actionable steps. I find that is the part that most people struggle to just like be able to do that. And now I do it automatically where I didn't even really have to see and think of it. I just like automatically went and coded it. But
Yeah,
that's like the skill that you are not getting in CS50 and you are not getting all these boot camps where they will tell you,
reason to start.
make a blog and this is like the spec of the blog. And maybe you don't need that for working at Netflix where they're going to give you a spec. You probably still need it unless you're like, I don't know, working in IBM or Salesforce, whatever the fuck they do. But if you want to do your own things, if you want to be able to make your ideas, you do need that skill. And it's probably like the most important thing that you're going to get.
Yeah.
And
So like
also a shit ton of patience.
right, patience is a big thing. It's going to take a while. I'm teaching my friend right now how to build React. He's been in real estate for a very long time, and he now wants to build his own startup and is kind of trying to learn how to code. I've been walking him through it, and man, it is tough because you realize that when we talk to someone and try to teach them how to code, people think we've just kind of invented this magical skill. What you don't see is that 4 or 5 years of just messing around, or just doing something super simple and slowly moving forward. And then you're like, oh, I just do all these commands, do these shortcuts, and then you're done. And people are just shocked and amazed. It's really that
Yeah,
patience.
and I feel like I do have an advantage. A bunch of us do have an advantage, but like we started really early. And like
Yeah,
for example, me, I started at 10, probably like a huge way of how my brain works, even like completely different from coding, has been influenced by like me thinking pretty logically for these things. Maybe if you don't think like this at all, it's going to take you more. The whole like everyone can code. I do think everyone can code, but like for some people it's going to be way harder. We should acknowledge that. But
yeah,
even
no,
like
that's
that,
true.
I feel like I have a physics problem which I found some people do not do. It's like, I know it's possible, and I have a limited amount of, I don't know, formulas that I can apply to this. So it's kind of like a puzzle. You have to find the piece that clicks, and it's like the one that does after that. Where other people may just like keep trying the same thing over and just get lost, and you can just do it methodically and doing it logically, and like it ends up working. And I feel like coding is the same thing with debugging and stuff. You
Yeah,
keep on tweaking things until you get a different error, and that's progress, and you've made it. And then maybe it took you an entire day to center the fucking button on CSS, but you're a step forward now. And that's why I mentioned that you need to have patience. There will be a time where you're trying to do something really simple and it will take you days or weeks. And I've been there. I'm even here now. But like I made this up that like cross post your lens post to Twitter. It
yeah,
cannot deal with images. It hasn't been able to deal with images for 2 months. And that's because the Twitter API sucks, but also I haven't had the time and it's just like I've been stuck there. There were moments where I tried and I was like, okay, I'll do this later. This is hard.
yeah.
I could probably just like sit there for 48 hours and solve it, but that's 40 hours of patience that I have to put into it and energy and everything. And that is something that I feel like people don't really sometimes expect when they get into this. This is going to be hard.
Yeah.
like hard in the sense of like the simplest things. Once you master the part of doing like the flow control, I guess, like the first I do this, then I do this, then I do this. The only hard part really is sometimes you write code that should do one thing and it doesn't do that thing, and you're left to
Yeah.
figure out why that happens, and that's really
It's a hard
freaking
skill.
hard. Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely very different. It's more that I think a lot of people are used to in the world of doing skills that are very linear. Like if I'm going to write an essay, I have everything. I have a page. I have to fill it with words. It might be hard sometimes to generate the right words, but at the end of the day, there's a linearity to my progress. I think coding sometimes, when you're getting started, is infinite past choosing one and trying to get there. I think that can definitely people can struggle with. It's kind of a new dimension.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I've been reading Ayala's tweets recently. She started to pick up some coding. She does a bunch of things, but one of the things that she really does is like doing surveys and analyzing data. And she started to pick up Python to process some of this data faster. And she was
Yeah,
tweeting her reaction to coding, and she was just like saying, I felt like there was a thing where you just learn how to do these things. And from talking to people that want to help me when something is wrong, I've realized that it's just everyone just says, okay, like how exactly do you want to do it? There are like 5 different ways that you should do it. No one is better than the other. It depends on what exactly you want to do. And it's going to make some things easier and harder down the line. And it seems like the intuition from most people is like that things are not like that. But
yeah,
things are definitely like that. And I feel like that's maybe like the kind of thing where like when you are learning to code, that you maybe don't see because you're just like, oh, here's an if statement, this is a for statement. Now you have to implement a thing that returns the Fibonacci. Like you get really detailed specs for most of the time. And this is also my objection with things like a build space and all of the things that are trying to build bootcamps for crypto, where like you will learn how to write a smart contract if you're giving a very detailed spec. But most of the hard part for smart contracts is actually coming up with the spec, and they're not going to teach that.
right. Yeah, no, it's kind of paradox of choices or like getting there is the difficult part. One note, I would like to go back a tiny bit to the thing we said earlier about the fact that we all started young. And I'd say that I would love to have a longer discussion about why a lot of the people that are successful now started young. And I'd say for one, remember the fact that you're looking at a certain amount of time that you have to learn in. And so obviously the people who are started young are going to be more successful faster. But in general, I think there's one thing that I would like to point out, which is when we're young, when you're messing around with an HTML page, like if you change a word or make a new heading, that's a success. Like I remember when I was messing around at the start, I changed the word, I made it print out hello world, and I'm like, hell yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
Right. Versus now, I think a lot of people, if they're getting started and they're our age or you're older, right? You're looking for this kind of final success, and your idea of success is like I want to build a whole app and website. Like you got to start small and like learn that progress and like learn to start. I think messing around is a great way to start. It's like don't assume you're going to build an app in a second. It's going to take them time. Be
Yeah,
okay with it.
I haven't hit that now. This week I was feeling a little bit unmotivated because, like, sure, I did the stable diffusion thing, but I feel like I haven't had this success moment in a while. Other than that I didn't really
Mm.
use. I just put it out there for people to have fun, and it was fun. But I if you go too long while like working really hard, not having that success moment, that's when you burn out, and that's when you like either quit coding or just like really struggle.
Yeah,
And so if you take on a project that is going to take a year, you're going to maybe go a year without that success thing. And that is, you're probably not going to go a full year. You're probably going
yeah,
to quit. And that's why people don't complete side projects. And even I have this thing. I've been working on it for 2 months. It's probably the best thing that or like the thing that I'm the most proud of from everything that I've ever built. But it's maybe like it's 10% away from shipping. And there's a whole like thing where like you do 80% of the thing and then you have to do the other 80%. So it
yes,
kind of feels like that, where I'm just like, I'm really desperate for the like success moment there, and I have to release that, but I cannot release that because it's not ready. And so you, especially at the start, now I'm just like, okay, I can do that gradually. I
right,
have learned how to manage that at the start. You have to avoid getting yourself into that. And that's why I mentioned doing like the small little projects that have a new piece. Because that's a really
yes,
easy way to have something you can do in a weekend or maybe in a day or like max in a month. And you can be done after that. You can be
right,
done, never come back about it again. It's something that works and you can show. It's going to be something that has an end state that is clear and that it's quick. And so you're
yeah.
not going to run into the issue where like, you don't get that moment.
Totally. We talk about this in Colossus too. Like tangibility is so important, right? Limit your project to under a month or even I say 2 weeks. Like by the end of the 2 weeks, you're not going to be motivated anymore. We talked about this up with Avi last time. Keep your project small and keep them tangible. And promise like most people can't just work forever without a success point, as you're saying right now. Limiting yourself down is so important.
Even now, when I'm like doing bigger stuff, it's just you build a thing, you release it after a while, and then it's done. You don't touch it. Maybe you come back to it, but you don't come back to it for months, except for
Yeah.
like bug fixes and stuff. And you need to kind of like unbind from it, and then maybe you come back to it and you just like you don't like it. That's fine. That happens to everyone. Maybe you can like then go and fix it for like one of the biggest projects that I released, side source. I redesigned the front end completely from scratch 4 times. And I did 3 of those things before releasing, which I should not have. But the 4th one was just like, okay, it's done. It's been a year. I'm going to rebuild this thing in React. It was Vue before. Why not? I want to play around with it. I want to design a new site. My design skills have changed, whatever. When I did it, and it affected no one. And so that's the kind of thing that you can do. But I can do that because it's launched now. Like it's not holding up the launch. When I did it before, that thing took 8 months to ship. It should have taken 4.
Let me go over some other things and just some advice that you would give to young builders. Can you name 3 experiences you felt were most important to getting where you are now?
The first thing that came to mind, just like as a life lesson that came out of nowhere, is as I mentioned before, I spent 1 year building this amazing app that like actually took any shitty documentation that people had on GitHub and turned it into a beautiful project, better than like read the docs or whatever was out there for free, automatically, cash, whatever. I think one person paid for it and I knew them. And then a year after, I built a thing that turned your articles into audio with AI. And I built that in a week, and it got like my first actual money. Where for months, it was doing like maybe $50 a month, which is not a lot. But again, I had no expenses.
Yeah.
And like the contrast of spending a year making a thing, and then spending a week making a thing, and the thing that works is the week one. That actually taught me a lot about just like where to focus energy, and like how to choose ideas.
Yeah, choose your battles is a good message. Just literally, Avi said the exact same thing in the previous interview. He was like, yeah, like the analytics page he did, it took 3 days or whatever. Like it took one
Yeah.
day or a couple hours and it took no time. The other project took forever. I had the same thing. Like I built
And I
this
feel
like
like
long.
Avi's an amazing example of this. And I'm really good friends with Avi because like he did the Ukraine thing. He has probably saved more lives there than like any other people in the ground. Like
Yeah.
that took him a weekend to get out of the ground. And so the leverage that you can get from actually picking your battles is insane. Like he
Yeah.
would have gone there to Ukraine and like actually, I don't know, do first aid or whatever on the ground for years and not come close to the amount of people that he has saved now.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's the really extreme example of why choosing your battles matters.
And also, Avi describes himself as a shit coder. He says a horrible coder. And it's like you realize the fact that like it's not actually about necessarily your coding skills. It's mostly about think about your battles, choose your battles, and then build something and commit. And I think you can create a lot of impact. No, I just had the same experience though. I built this app for a month. I was doing like this, like I built a whole newsletter service and it took me a while. And then a surprisingly difficult project because I was using a bunch of languages. It took me a month or whatever. And then I did the plagiarism.fyi project where I was like going to beat Moss. That took me like 4 hours of research and 2 hours to build the actual website. I launched it and it got 300 retweets or whatever. And I was like, what the hell? Like you spent so much time on one project, but then one to close up. And you're like, I spent no time on that. Yeah.
And I feel like the reason why that worked is there's this thing. I call it coding adventures. I got the name from like a YouTube channel that I really like. That's all of these coding adventures. You can search on YouTube to find it. Which is just you go down a rabbit hole and you document that rabbit hole. And then you build something to show for it. And just like package it so that the time that it took you to go down rabbit hole, which maybe a few hours or a day here, someone can get that from an hour of reading or maybe even less. And I don't know. At least I feel like most of the core people actually really like rabbit holes. And I have had making a chess engine in my project list for a big while. And I'll probably still even do it sometime. But I got the experience of actually doing that, all of that, served to me without having to do any of the work. And like, sure, if you're actually looking to monetize, maybe you could do one of these every month and do a newsletter. That's probably not a good idea. You'll burn out. But as a thing of the want to make something that people will like, that's a really good candidate. Just do any amount of research on something that a lot of people don't look into, and they like package it for them. That's great.
Another connected point too here is the fact that like the things that are going to be successful and people will like, and the things that you're proud of in terms of what work you did and projects you love the most are not always going to be the same thing. And it's important to basically focus on you want to care about making things for people that people enjoy and people like, but you also want to derive your identity and what you're proud of out of the things that you actually felt were most important. Like for me, there's that 1 month project that I actually am very proud of the code I wrote there, but like at the end of the day, that service shut down versus the one I spent in 4 hours. Like, I like the fact that everybody liked it. And of course, my goal is to make something that a lot of people like and enjoy and use. But actually, the thing I'm most proud of is actually things that nobody sees sometimes. And make sure that you're not always, I think, you want to affect people in the world, but don't extract your value on how much
Definitely. I feel like the good balance is something that you enjoy building, and then also something that other people will enjoy using or reading about. And I feel like that's really obvious to say, but it does make a lot of difference when you have those things. Because if you are just like making something for others, you'll burn out or you will not care about it. If you're just making something for you, do risk getting into a cycle where like you finish and then you're like, okay, what I'm done. Like that doesn't have that satisfaction that you get otherwise. And so that's like the sweet spot. The other, I guess big point. The first one was I think choose your battles. The second one I would say is just like document your journey. And that goes for tweeting about things, that goes for making things open
Yes.
source, right? I find that my best ever content that I did on crypto at all is probably like the first month that I was learning and I was making a thread of, hey, I just learned this. Here's how it works. Here's my
Yeah.
perspective from someone who did not know the thing to someone that now does know the thing. So I am currently in the middle of this. I have the most context that I will ever have in the situation because believe it or not, tomorrow you're going to lose some of that. And now when I try to do introduction to crypto things, a year after, it's I lose that perspective and I probably lose focus and I lose a lot of the things. I feel like that's very important. And you also can build a personal brand, get people to follow you, whatever. That doesn't matter. The thing that matters is that you're going to be thankful of it yourself.
Totally. And also, what's interesting is I had the exact same experience. I built my chess engine or whatever recently. At the end of the day, it's not that good of a chess engine. It sucks. Nobody used it or played against it, really. But I wrote an article on like how I built it and like my story of like how I learned everything I learned. The chess engine got 100 people using it. And then that webpage got like 1.5 million like visitors over like whatever, how many months it was. And you're like, wait, like you realize that even if your app sucks or the thing you built, your product is not good, the learnings you have from it, chances are there are so many people in the world that will learn from it or could copy it or use it
Yeah,
and
and also
understand.
the thing is, if 2 years from now you need to build something that was related to chess engines, you may remember some of it,
Right.
but that knowledge is completely lost. It's just you're not throwing knowledge away.
So let's just change it up a bit. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Feel like, yeah, this is probably not applicable to anyone, to everyone. But as I said, I grew up in Spain. Europe doesn't have this entrepreneurship culture. You're supposed to go to college and then find a job. And I feel like I could have been a little bit more ambitious, not with like my life or whatever, but like the projects what I was doing, where I was saying, okay, yeah, let's like make a thing that like makes something 1% better. I don't know. I still feel like for most of the things that I did were pretty cool. Like the whole turning audio articles into audio. I was
Yeah.
literally the first one that did that, and then even now people are still like making it up like that every month. So I'm proud of that one. But there were other things like the make your dogs slightly prettier. But then I took a year to build a thing. I did learn a shit ton from that, but I feel like it has spent more time just like building something that were just like dreaming a little bigger. I still don't want to like go be a founder, make a startup, do this like incredibly big thing. That's at least not for me yet.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to think it's really the best thing that I can do in a year to make a thing that could have been a template that you can set up in an hour.
Yeah, I think that's the thing too, which is I think everyone can usually benefit from higher risk taking behavior. It usually works better. You know, all the guys who did Bash.io, like they were doing like synthetic content media. I think they were all teenagers or 15, 16, 17 at the time. And they're in GZM. We're going to build synthetic content media where like, automatic, you write and then it creates like, you write a doc and it creates someone talking about it synthetically. And like, that's like far out of, I think, any of our realms of what we could build. But the whole point is like jumping into something that's hard or difficult or cool. It's a great way to push yourself. We can just lose track of pushing ourselves as much as we did at the start,
Yeah.
and our learning rate goes down. And the thing you've got to make sure is constantly check if you're not learning anything more, and then make everything harder. Yeah,
And I feel like the thing is just it goes back to learning by debugging.
yeah,
Just if you throw yourself to a harder problem and you manage to debug yourself out of it, you're going to learn a shit ton more than if it was like an easier problem. I feel like it always goes back to that and choose your battles. Those are like the
yeah.
two things that it's always the same.
Yeah, and then so question: is there any like, specific most valuable skill you learned when you were younger? What's a skill you think maybe other people don't have, or people who are not builders don't have that you learned and you felt was valuable?
I feel like probably one of the most valuable skills that I've learned is just like communicating.
Mm,
In the sense of developers do a lot of that, where you can just like you are good at explaining to other people what you're doing, and you're good to explain to other people how things work. That's a really rare skill from what I've seen, and that would against my intuition a little bit. Like part of my job at work right now is just like going to places and explain to people how to use it. And it
yeah,
turns out that not a lot of people are amazing at that. But if you have that, the whole learning in public thing becomes like at least 10x more valuable. And
totally.
that is, I do believe that is a skill that you can develop. Especially like, I'm not native English. I really struggled with my pronunciation at the start. There's a lot of stuff, but I feel like I still managed to like do a pretty good job at explaining concepts and explaining code and all of those things. You have to be a good storyteller in a way. If you think about,
Yes.
I don't know, Steve Jobs or like literally anyone else, I mean, Steve Jobs wasn't even a coder, but like even for the coders, the if you look at like the people that you actually admire, and you probably have your own examples, like how like Jordan Signer, Adam Wadham, all these people. one of the things that they have in common is that they're not only great coders, but they're also like really great marketers or storytellers. So they are
Yeah.
great at all of this communication.
I think it's true with, as you said, literally everyone. Like Elon Musk, for example, who also isn't the greatest at speaking and he's awkward during events. That being said, though, I would remark him as like one of the best storytellers out there right now. And the amount of people he's converted to like really believe in his mission, right? It's not by chance that everyone just loves what he's doing. He's really sold it. So like storytelling as like one of the most foremost features you need to build something is, I think, is so true. So what are you working on right now? So tell me more where you are right now. What's your vision for the future?
Basically, the answer to that is a few months ago, for the first time ever in my life, I usually work really short term. I don't even know where I'm going to be in like a month, like
Yeah.
actually living physically in or what I'll be doing. But I actually sit down and said, okay, in 10 years from now, what do I want to have built? For the first time ever, I have never done that. I feel like it's a good thing that I had never done that because before I did like I feel like I'm at the first time in my career where I can actually have that perspective.
Yeah.
So maybe that's not necessarily a advice, but I did that for the first time and I came up with 4 bullet points. And so now I'm figuring out these are like things that will take multiple years to build, which is also like I have never spent more than a year building a thing. I'm figuring out how to put these bigger than ever things into motion. And at the same
Yeah.
time, I've been really working into improving my design skills. I feel like I was a good designer. People said that I had my own style. I feel like I just like stole a bunch of styles and mix them up. There are still like some designs that I'm just like amazed with, especially the ones that use like really animations. Like I feel like animations that were mostly overlooked. And then all of this that polish where you just go back to the page and you can feel like I feel like the dynamic island that came out recently is an example, a great example of this where it feels liquid. And
Yeah.
that's really hard. And you can tell that like someone spent a month
Yes.
making sure that the animations there were like incredibly clean. And
Totally.
so I that's like the part that I feel like I'm missing because I really admire the people that can do that, and I do not know how to do that and right now. So I am, apart from the other stuff, also trying to learn how to do more of that and how to do more animations. Gonna start
Totally.
with Premiere Motion and all of those things and stuff.
Totally. No, that's a totally new frontier. It
Yeah.
sounds awesome. I would love to get into that more. I'm trying to do more video stuff, but like animations, totally. They make everything so like it's that like extra 10%. So how can people reach out to you if they have questions or any they want help or some advice on a project? Can they reach out to you on Twitter or anywhere?
Yeah, so I am fortunately or unfortunately extremely online with capital letters. So I'm going to be on Twitter a lot. I will say though, I get an insane amount of DMs, especially now that I'm in crypto. And sometimes I do not have the time to answer all those. So
Yeah.
I unfortunately am at a point where I cannot promise that unless if someone spends the time, you can see that and I will do my best.
Okay.
But
Of
I cannot promise anything. I also have a
course. Of
website where
course.
you can find with for everything else. That's linked on my Twitter. Let's go with
Yeah.
my Twitter for everything. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's M1GelPF.
You
And
have like
in
1,000
there,
followers, right? So I'm sure you get a
yes.
lot of questions. Yeah. That's
Unfortunately,
awesome.
yes. Yeah.
So any last points, like any last word or thing you want to get in earlier or point to all the young builders out there?
I mean, I would say learn by debugging, choose your battles, and document your journey. That's like the 3 things that you should take away from this.
Yeah.
Those are like the things that took me 10 years to learn. It's been 10 years now, but yeah, it took me 10 years to actually learn not only what those 2 things, but understand what they mean.
Yeah.
And like that's like the biggest boost that I can give you to do anything at all. So you
Okay.
should remember those 2 things and just like when you're when you see yourself in one of those situations, those will probably will come to your mind.
Thank you so much for coming, man. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for having me.